So first I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to Startup Grind. Startup Grind is a series, event series where we have different startups, VCs and so forth, and they talk about their experience in the startup world. Tonight we have Niko from Redox, and Q Harrison of Vietnam USA is going to interview him. Just for some of you, if this is your first time of being here at 100 State, I just want to give a quick overview of what 100 State is. So 100 State, this is a co-working community. It's the largest co-working community in the state of Wisconsin. We have over 220 members, and this members consist of a lot of different people in a lot of different industries. So you have people in marketing, you have people in health IT, you have people who are non-profit organizations, artists, hence the art gallery that we have in the space. So we're really proud of what we've accomplished so far. We've been only 2 and a half years, and we really had some tremendous growth in that time period. So we want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and Q is going to take over and just handle the interview with Startup Grind. So I want everyone to give a round of applause for Q and Niko also.
Well, Niko, nice to have you today.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So just to kind of jump into things, how have you been?
I'm good. It's nice to be back in what I feel like is my home, 100 State, so it's nice.
For those who don't know, tell them a bit about how this is your home.
So I used to work at Epic back at, you guys know Epic, right? Biggest employer in Dane County, and left there about 3 years ago and came out into Madison, started a company. It was a knowledge management software vendor company, like Stack Overflow, but for healthcare, and was like, where are all my Epic friends? And there weren't very many. How many people here used to work at Epic?
Still working.
2? Nice. In a crowd this big, like with our demographic here, mostly dudes in 20 to 30, we should have way more like Epic people. It's just not represented in the community very well. So one of the ideas I had as I started a company, I met Mike Fenchel and some other guys, and we were like, let's make a space where we can have startups working together. People can meet each other. They can form companies out of ideas they have, find partnerships and things like that. It started on a train car out on East Washington, and there were 11 of us in there, and the thing was poorly heated and had bad internet. But we ended up moving from there into 100 State Street, right across the way, and grew that over the next 6-8 months or so into 100 State, and then moved it in here. And 100 State turned out for us to be what we hope it to be for many other people, as kind of a stepping stone, a place where you can find your teams, find great ideas, and turn it into something worth growing. There's Mike. I just talked about you. So me and Mike and a lot of the other guys who were here at the beginning, James is sitting back there. We had found our teams here, and we had found the people that we want to start companies with, and over that time period I probably started like 7 or 8 companies, all kind of out of ideas formed at 100 State, and Redox now is one that has caught a little bit of traction. And as soon as Redox done, whether it flames out or goes IPO, I'll probably come back to 100 State and try to find something else.
So to talk about like your entrepreneurial grind and drive and the mechanisms behind it, what do you feel like, what makes 100 State, a great place for fostering those ideas and getting started on them?
I feel like one of the cool things about 100 State is that you can walk in here and talk to anybody, right? Like, there's some people sitting back there working right now, right? And we could definitely go and interrupt them and be like, what's up? And they wouldn't be upset or anything. They would be, they'd tell you what they're working on, and they'd share with you. And if you had questions, they would share. And that's one of the great things about the place, is that it's such a community where you can interact with people in that manner. People are intrinsically motivated to help each other out, and because of that, it's really easy to get passionate about ideas that are formed here, and ideas that other people might come up with, or that you come up with, and kind of rally a team around. So that's one of the great things about being here, is that you can say, hey, I have this idea for a company, and I think it'll do this. You'll find people to really quickly give you feedback on why that's a stupid idea. You'll also find people that will get super excited about it and want to build it with you. And that's been my experience here, is that you can always find kind of people to work on stuff with.
And jumping off of that idea of like a co-working space and an environment, you being at the forefront of co-working here in Madison, what do you see the future being of co-working spaces in general?
I think co-working's it's going to be the new norm, right? Like, our parents all worked in offices and cubicles. I worked in the cubicle for like 4 years. I worked at Wells Fargo in the cubicle, and I think that's the only cubicle I'll ever have to sit in my life, right? And I don't think that's that uncommon these days. Like, most of us are moving out of jobs where you're jammed into a room. Like, this room actually used to be full of cubicles. Like, when it was the old office, there used to be like lines where we could see them. That's kind of dead and gone. I think in the future we're going to have a much more collaborative working environment. We're also seeing jobs where you can be self-employed and actually have a company. You can start your own one-person shop or a couple people and make enough money to live on. And the great thing about that is you're more independent. The sad thing about that is you don't have coworkers, and coworkers is the best thing about working at a big company. So coworking solves that problem, because you have coworkers, you can go to lunch with people, but you don't have to work with them, really. You sit across the table from them.
So I'm gonna jump back a bit.
Yeah.
Going back to what was your first entrepreneurial startup?
I don't know.
If it was cutting grass, you could say cutting grass.
No. So I love big companies. Like, I didn't set out to start companies. When I was in college, I worked at Wells Fargo. We had 400,000 employees, and I was an operations analyst there for 4 years, and it was awesome. And I thought, this is my track. I'm going to be a VP one day, and this is where I want to be. And then I went to grad school, and I guess grad school I moved to Boston to study economics, and that was probably the first time I started working with small businesses or startups. I worked with a dude who he worked at a bike shop. I was a cyclist. It's sad saying I was a cyclist. I don't ride my bike very much anymore. But there was a dude at this bike shop, typical bike shop dude, who really loved cycling, and he wanted to do bicycle tours around Boston. So at the shop we had a bunch of bikes, and he's like, well, we have tourists come in here all the time and rent bikes, why don't we show them around? So from the shop he started Urban Adventures, like pun included. And he started giving bike tours, which turns out to be a much more profitable business than a bike store. Bike stores make like 5-10% margins. Bicycle tours make like 300% margins. So I met him while he was in the bike store, and we grew it to its own shop, and then we acquired another bike tour company in Boston, and we had the TripAdvisor's like #1 thing to do in Boston, Urban Adventures. And that was my first time like working with a small company. And I wouldn't say I got the entrepreneurial bug, but I thought that was really fun. But after that I went and worked at Epic, which is not a startup, right? But it was always kind of in an entrepreneurial role there. So kind of bounced around the company, trying to figure out ways to make it better. I had 6 different offices there in 3 years, which was a whole lot of different groups. And really had a job where I didn't have core responsibilities in the company. I could just kind of figure out how to make it better. So when I left the company, it just seemed natural to kind of keep doing what I was doing inside of Epic, but out in the outside world, which is just trying to figure out how to make things better. And that's what entrepreneurs do, right?
Fair enough. So I guess going on from that story, what keeps you motivated today?
I love solving problems. I think that the problem that we're solving in our company right now is a really tough problem, and as long as we're still kind of on the edge of solving it, I think I'll be really interested in it. One of the things I was really scared about, we recently raised a round of investment, and I was worried that raising that money will, you don't raise money until you're kind of ready to scale. And when we closed around, I was like, oh crap, are we ready to scale? Does that mean we're not a startup anymore? Like, have we solved it? And like, do we just kind of like rinse, wash, and repeat now? And that was really scary for me, because I thought maybe this will be a job and maybe I won't like it anymore. But I found out now it's just as hard figuring out how to scale it as it is how to solve the problem. Yeah.
And going from there, for those who don't know in the audience right now, what is Redox? Like, tell us a bit about the venture that you're embarking on currently.
Yeah, Redox is really complicated for if you're not a developer or not in the healthcare space. And if you're neither of those, like, forget about it. Like me trying to explain to my mom, I still don't think she understands what it is, but it's we are an API layer on top of healthcare data. So what we do is I'll give you a little background. Over the last decade or so, every healthcare organization in the country pretty much has installed an electronic medical record. So that's where Epic, all of its business is installing and maintaining these electronic medical records across the country, and they have many competitors. So now electronic medical records have been adopted pretty much. But the problem is that all the data is kept in the basement of the health system, literally under lock and key, like in a data center that the health system maintains, which means it doesn't talk to the internet. It's basically like they've implemented all this technology, but it doesn't know what the internet is. So it can't exchange with the application that you've made on the web, an application that you've made on a phone, an application that a patient would interact with. The data can't be accessed by it. So what Redox does is we literally connect up to these various instances of Epic and other electronic medical records across the country. We standardize the data, and then we make them available over the internet, over web services. So we have an API layer for healthcare data. So that's in a nutshell what we do. So our customers are software vendors in healthcare who are selling to the healthcare enterprise. So a lot of startups, but a lot of other, anyone making technology that sells to hospitals and clinics. So it's a really big market, growing really, really fast right now.
Understood. So to kind of, I guess I would say, dive into Redox a bit, like, you were already in the healthcare market with Epic, and then leaving Epic, doing your ventures, and then starting Redox. What brought you back to healthcare?
So Epic brought me into healthcare, but once you're in healthcare, there's just so much to do. So healthcare is 18% of U.S. GDP. It's estimated that about a third of what's spent on healthcare is waste. $780 trillion a year is just wasted. And what I mean by waste is just like unnecessary procedures, underutilized resources, overutilized resources, excessive spending for all sorts of different reasons. So healthcare has all these really big problems, and there's so much to do from an efficiency standpoint. Technology is about efficiency, right? It makes us better and faster with better tools, better data to be used in that. So there's just such a low-hanging fruit in the healthcare industry. And once you kind of know it and know the technology that's being used in it, you can really see the areas where these efficiency gains can really make an impact. So I never thought I would leave that industry. And even starting 100 State stuff, it was just really a means to help out with any of the healthcare technology things I was working on. Some of you might remember after we got 100 State kind of rolling, I started something called 100 Health, which was to try to help people start healthcare IT companies. So we started 7 healthcare tech companies in like 6 months or so, and that was one of the big things that made us realize that of the 7 that we started, 6 of them would need to actually integrate with Epic and other EMRs. So we realized that was a bigger opportunity than helping to kind of hand start 7 of them. The 7th one was a book company, so that didn't need to integrate. But that was like me and James. James is laughing back there.
Hi, James.
Hey, James. James is going to come present with me, but then we were told this is supposed to be one person. So that's me.
So let's bridge off of that. So finding a co-founder, finding a founder, that's a difficult experience because you can only do so much. So tell us about that process.
I think finding the right group of co-founders is like the most important thing you can do, because every investor that we talk to invested in us because of our team, not because of, the problem we're solving is compelling, but we probably could have raised money on a different problem. So finding that right team that not only has complementary skills, but also has chemistry to work together well is super valuable. I've seen and worked with teams where there wasn't a good chemistry, where there was a developer and like a salesperson, and the developer was like the slave to the salesperson, or vice versa, right? And I think the greatest thing about our team is that we really have sort of a balanced mix. I do the front end on sales. I bring in customers, but I'm not necessarily very good at being responsible about following up with them and kind of bringing them all the way through and getting them live, because I get really excited early on and then they fall off. So we brought on another person, the third co-founder, Luke, who is really good at project management and keeping the ship afloat and operations and following up with people and contracts and stuff like that. So Luke's like our operations project management guy. He's our, make sure that we don't blow anything up. James, on the other hand, is really great with technology and finding other developers. and kind of inspiring technologists around what we're building, and it's very, a tech-heavy product that we sell to developers. So having a developer who likes to talk to other developers is crucial for that. So we have this like tripod, I think, that works out really well. The other good thing about having 3 people is that you never have a one-on-one battle. With 2 people, it's like you can get in an argument that will stalemate. With 3 people, like, if I don't agree to something that Luke and James do, like, there's no point in fighting. I'm just like, okay. Like, I trust that if they both agree to it, then it's good to go. James and I we were coming over here, and we were worried that there wouldn't be any beer. And so we were like, should we use company money to buy 2 30 racks of PBR to bring it to Hunter State? And we were like, yeah, we should. And we had quorum, right? We had 2 out of the 3. So we can do stuff like that really quickly. But Luke probably would have said no. But so it's like things like that. You can, but also with the company. But as far as finding them is really difficult, right? I met James from when we started Hunter State, we also organized TEDx Madison. And I met James at TEDx Madison, and then James started working with us at Hunter State, and then we worked on probably 3 or 4 projects or so before we started Redox together. So it took a long time to understand and build that chemistry and build that trust in each other for us to actually go in on a bigger project together. But additionally, even if you find someone that you can work with, have a vesting schedule, right? Like when we started the company, me, Luke, and James, we said, like, we like each other now, but we don't know where this thing's going. We don't know if one person's going to have a kid and need to like move to Montana or something. We don't know where we're all going to be in 2 years, but we know that this company's going to take longer than that. So we did a 4-year vesting schedule, even for founders, where if any of us left the company before 4 years, we would give up a proportionate amount of equity over that time period with a 1-year cliff. So it was literally like this summer where our 3 founders actually started earning equity in our own company. Technically, legally, we actually own the whole company, but we have to forfeit it. But for all intents and purposes, we'd have to give it up even if I left the company right now, which I think is really important on keeping all the founders motivated and involved in what you're working on. I've been in companies in the past where a founder has left for whatever reason, and they just take 1/3 of the company with them, which cripples the whole thing.
Makes sense. I guess what I want to dive into now is let's talk about lots of good insights, problems. More so, you touched on it briefly in your last statement, but doing a startup is tough, and essentially a lot of problems arise, and oftentimes founders don't talk about them, or people they kind of just showcase the good. You raised a lot of money, blah blah blah. But let's talk. How does your team deal with problems, and how do you move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I don't think I'm the best communicator, like even on teams or with people I'm working with, because if there's a problem, I won't necessarily be as vocal about sharing it. I think James is probably similar in that we're kind of quieter when it comes to weird things. But that's where Luke really is great, because he's like, there's something weird going on here, let's talk about it. He calls it out and tries to get it out in the open. But even so, it's hard, right? Like, how do you maintain constant communication and make sure everyone's on the same page? We actively try to implement things on our team to forcefully give feedback. So one of the things that we've done recently is we've created values, right? And some of these values are, we value each other's feedback. We give feedback not to attack a person, but because it's better for the company. And then we've implemented processes where one person every week, we have a team meeting every week, and one person basically gets roasted every team meeting, where we all prepare feedback for them beforehand and send it to them. And then during that team meeting, we talk about that feedback. And so the person isn't necessarily getting feedback one-on-one or from their direct manager or something, but the whole team is consistently saying you're really good at these things. It's coupled with the person who's getting the feedback says, this is what I want to be working on in my job. And everyone says, well, okay, if you want to do that, then you have to get better at these things, or you have to give up these things. And I think that's a really eye-opening process, both for the person who's getting the feedback, but for also everyone on the team to have a platform to give that all the time. And I think with that constant sort of open communication, that creates a culture of more communication and more feedback. for me personally, it's been hard with people I work really closely with because, like when I'm hanging out with them, we're tackling problems. We're not necessarily talking about like how we feel about things. So we've created sort of asynchronous ways to talk about that, where I'll send a questionnaire and they'll fill it out, and then I'll respond asynchronous. So it's like, no one has to like sit down with each other. It's kind of like a little kid's way of doing it, right? But it gets the job done, and I think it's so far been effective. But that's the hardest part, I think, is kind of continuing to give people feedback and stay open about communications. Because if you let it build up, like it's not good for anyone.
Makes sense. To bounce off of that, like more so, you're a founder, your team are all founders, and you're tackling a problem. You don't make headway all of the time, right? Sometimes, not making progress gets frustrating, and you get depressed. How do you deal with founders' depression?
Ooh, founders' depression. I don't think I've been depressed in this journey. I could see where, so there's a lot of times when there's a lot of pressure, right? And I think it's you could feel like you're the one that has to do it all. But that's what co-founders are for, right? You can lean on each other and ask for help. And frankly, like a lot of whenever I get stressed out, I sit back and I always say to myself, like, all these deadlines that we've made and promises we've made, like, this is stuff that we've made up, right? A startup's something you make up. And if it's not going well, if you're not sort of liking what you're doing, you can make it up a different way so you do like it. Or if these are good problems to have, right? Like if you have too many deadlines because there's too many customers, that's a good sign that you can raise money, because you can tell an investor, I'm too busy for these reasons. We need to raise money to hire people so we can have more capacity to work on these things. So there's, it's only going to be short term. And I think that's a key part of a startup, is that your job is only a short term thing. If you're doing the same thing at a startup for an extended period of time, it probably means you don't have a startup and you have just a lifestyle business. But if you're on a, fast growth startup, what you're going to be doing is going to be consistently changing, from trying to figure out how to solve the problem, to raising money to to hire people to solve the problem, to actually managing a group of people to solve that problem. And all of that's consistently changing.
Very interesting. Your concept of a startup versus like a lifestyle business, and like, just revenue models in its entirety. Like, what's your take on that?
So I have a pretty defined idea of what a startup is in my head, and that's an organization that's searching for a business model, right? Which means that you don't know how to deliver the value that you envision. You think you have an idea, you have a hypothesis of it, but the whole point of your organization and what you're doing is to test out that hypothesis on a consistent basis. Once you've identified, once you get some positive results to those tests, you can start to operationalize it. And what this evolves into is a fully functional operations that delivers that value. And that's a business. But before you figure that out, it's a startup. So with Redox, we spent the first 6 months or so trying to figure out what to do with our hands. Like, we weren't even an integration company. We were 100 Health at the time, an incubator. We became integration company. Well, so this is like June of last year until December or so. We didn't know what we were doing. Like, didn't have a problem we were solving. We were just like people who were passionate about healthcare. Found our problem, found a proposal of our solution in December or so. We raised our first round of investment at that time, just around that idea, and the team that we had and the sort of feedback we've had over the past 6 months. And then so from June until December until this summer, it was really about how do we figure out if the market will use this solution. And that was our hypothesis, is that we think that this specific customer, basically healthcare software vendors, will use this type of solution. And that's what we were testing this whole time. And we were able to get some good feedback that they would. We still haven't made any money by this point. We've kind of sold, in some cases, things that didn't existed. We've sold sort of developer tools to let them play with what it could do, till a point where we had enough people buying these things that didn't actually deliver the value, but were a sort of first step to delivering that value. And then, so this summer in May, we opened up our A round, and basically spent May to October recruiting investors and negotiating the deal and closing it out. And then October was our actual first go live. The first time anyone actually ever received value from our product was more than a year after we started the company, and raised 2 rounds, which blows my mind, because like you would think that we would have made more progress in that time period. But truly still a startup, because we've had a couple go lives now. We have a couple people using our software, and a couple. The cool thing about it is like we actually see patient data flow through it, and we see the lives that are affected by the 2 applications that we're connecting. We're still at a point where we don't know how to get that handful that's live to 500 that are live. Once we get to 500, that'll be enough feedback to say, now let's operationalize how we did that, and turn it more into a business for that product itself. So right now it's still totally startup with hopes and dreams and not much else, very little revenue.
So to jump into like the whole startup mechanism in Vibe, or I guess I would say like raising money versus not raising money, the concept of an executive summary, right? I'm sure like when you were pitching to investors and things of that nature, you kind of had to break your business down in 1 or 2 sheets. And for your pricing model right now, what did you put down for the revenue chart?
Yeah. We had a 1-pager. We didn't really have an executive summary when we were raising. So our fundraising process consisted of, we were coming out of an accelerator program in Baltimore called Dream It Health. We partnered with Johns Hopkins. And has anyone been to like Generators Demo Day? It's like a wild party with laser lights, and it's awesome, right? Our accelerator was nothing like that. It was a room like this, and we pitched to like a crowd like this, and I was like, oh, that was kind of shitty. But what they did instead was they took the money they would otherwise spend on a sweet light show stuff, and they set us up with meetings with VCs around the country. So they flew us to New York, Boston, San Francisco, Palo Alto, and basically they got us set up with probably 30 different meetings with VCs. So we walked in, and we literally had 15 minutes with each of these VCs to convince them that they should have another meeting with us. And so we had a 1-pager, and we had a deck that most of the time we didn't use. And we just talked to them about who we are and why we were passionate about this and why we think we can solve it. And from that, it turned into more discussions. But we didn't necessarily need like a 1 or 2-pager to get that intro. We were able to use an accelerator to really lubricate that introduction, which I think is one of the most valuable things in an accelerator, is a signal to the world that you had some adult supervision over a couple-month period, and you were ready to talk to investors, because they're putting their selves on the line when they make those introductions.
Makes sense. What's your thoughts on like the accelerator programs in the country? I mean, they're popping up all over, left and right. Like, what makes a good accelerator, and do you feel like the non-equity accelerators are more beneficial than the ones that take equity, or like, what's your take?
I actually just read an article on this for MedCity News, a healthcare publication. But so we've seen, particularly in healthcare, but in the whole country, there's like 1,000 accelerator programs that have launched since around 2005 or so. There's just tons of them, and because of that, they've started altering their business models to shift towards industry focus. So there's a lot that are just doing healthcare. There's some that are doing ed tech, fintech. There's different verticals that will focus on that will have an accelerator focused on it. There's 96 healthcare accelerators in the country right now, and we've gone through 3 of them, and each one of them has shifted their business model very recently. So Dream It Health was very much more of the Techstar style accelerator, where they give a fixed investment amount for a fixed amount of equity during a program that has a start and an end. You're expected to move and be co-located during the program, and then it ends with a demo day, and you're supposed to raise money. Similar to what Generator does, and that's what's called the Global Accelerator Network model. This model is, the accelerator works for you essentially as a company, because they own a piece of your company. So their incentives are aligned to help you raise money, help you raise a round that's at a substantially higher valuation than the money they gave you coming into the program. And they deliver results as you would expect with, most people raise money after the program. Most people go on to hopefully grow a business. Not most people, but a lot of them go on to grow their business with the continued help of the accelerator. So if you know anyone who's gone through Generator, they're still a close-knit family. Joel downstairs at Generator still makes sales for companies later on after they've already left the program. Then we went on to do 2 more accelerators, but these other 2 accelerators were non-equity accelerators partnered with health systems. So the health system paid the accelerator to run their program, and then the accelerator works for the health system, not for the startup. They bring in the startups, and then their goals are the same, right? Help the company grow, but they have no financial incentive in that company, which I found to be a very, very different business model, because their incentive is to make the program look like it was successful for the health system that they were partnered with, which means that they want to find companies that will look good on stage. They want to find companies that will. It's more of like they just wanted to introduce you to all the people in the health system to make that health system feel good about the program. So it's very different. Like after it's over, you're not part of the program anymore. It seems very, very different. I don't know which one's more or less effective, because in healthcare, selling into health systems is one of the hardest things you could possibly do. It takes 12, 18 months. So partnering with health systems is a way to fast track that. So if the health systems that partner can deliver that value, then it might be better than the ones that are actually investing in you. The ones that we went through, I think we did one in Houston with Texas Medical Center. They introduced us to literally dozens of health systems down there, and we're still talking to them. We haven't gotten any signed deals with any of them, but we are now much further along in that sales cycle, probably 4 or 5 months ahead of where we would have been if we had to find the people ourselves.
Awesome. So going from there, let's talk about raising money, right? So you go through an accelerator. Ideally, they take a cut or they don't take a cut. They give you a little bit of money, but it's still on you to close out the round. What were some tips and tricks like on raising the money? Yeah.
So Luke on our team was, we had a fun dynamic when we raised. So I would give the pitch to the investors and kind of be at that first meeting and get them excited, and then. Really, it was just like how we do sales to companies. Like I get the hook, and then Luke closes them. So Luke's our closer. So Luke, we literally lost Luke for like 2 months in the company while he was closing our round. So we had gone around the country, we pitched to 40 or so VCs, whittled it down to a group of 6 that we thought we wanted to work with based on the value that they could add beyond the money. And basically worked with them to figure out who would actually come in our round. We set out to raise $1.5 million, and some of the investors we were talking to said that the minimum check size they would cut is like $2 million. So we're like, this isn't going to work with 6 people in it. So we spent a lot of time working with these different VCs, visiting with them, visiting with their partners to understand who's going to give us the most value, who do we like the most, and we really considered it more of people who would be joining our team, like as if they were part of our company. And so we ended up finding a lead that we just really, really liked the guy. We went out to Boston to meet with their whole partnership, and when we got off the plane, he called me like right when we landed, and he was like, hey, did you guys just land? Do you want to get dinner? Like just out of the blue. And then we showed up to dinner, and he brought his wife and 11-year-old daughter like to dinner in downtown Boston. He's like, well, we were going out and we thought we'd invite you guys. So it was like really kind of laid back, and I don't know, he had a lot of great advice and stuff, and we ended up working with them to lead the round, and then finding other investors that would take a smaller piece to supplement that. Once we had the term sheets down, we ended up going with 3 different VCs. We increased the size of our round to $3.53 million. And then we negotiated the first term sheet from the lead investor, which has a whole bunch of the first times I heard about the terms that come in a term sheet, I thought, like, how are these financial people making all these tricks to like screw over startups? It was just like really weird things. Like, if you've ever raised money, there's things like preferred stock, there's participating stock, there's dividends, there's like all these weird things that are super confusing to understand until you actually put them in an Excel sheet and say, if the company exits, like what would happen if these terms existed. That, of course, they know really well because they work on these term sheets all day long. So we spent a lot of time, and I should say Luke spent a lot of time negotiating these terms. We had to threaten to walk away a couple times. We had to stand our ground. We found a good middle ground that we were all kind of happy with. But we literally lost Luke for like 2 months as a person. We had 5 people in the company at this time, and so losing 1/5 of your company is like a big deal. There were days when we just wouldn't see him. He would stay at home and talk to investors and lawyers all day. So it was really hard. And then, and then we closed.
Awesome.
Came back.
Awesome. So I know, like, when raising a round or like getting ready to raise a round, one of the common dilemmas you have is, do you want to go in for the wealth or do you want to go in for the equity? And so it's like you can't really be an entrepreneur and get both. Where did Redox kind of fit in that equation?
The way I think about it is it's kind of binary. It's like you can get both, right? If we grow a company that does well, adds the value that we want to, it doesn't matter if I personally own 5% of the company or if I own 20% of the company. Because if it does well and if it makes money, and if it ends up making enough money to actually add revenue, then I'll be getting a sweet paycheck, and I'll be getting potentially dividends paid out from the company. We might go public, or if we get acquired for like $100 million, that's still too much money to spend. Like at least for me right now, like thinking about how much money I've been making, like. The difference between $1 million and $2 million, like, it's double, but when you're that rich, like, for all of us in the room, like, it's kind of, either way you're rich. Like, you could probably spend it all, yeah, but it's both life-changing money. And so that's really the way we thought about this, is that we're growing a business that needs a network. And what a network means is that we have to grow the network as fast as possible. So if we wanted this to be successful, we would need to raise money so we could grow the team and expand the network. So we looked at it as like, we're going to raise as much money as we can to make that possible. And if the company goes well, we're all going to be well off. If the company doesn't go well and we own 99% of it, doesn't matter. And this is the first company I've raised money for, and I own less of this company now than I do of, I probably have ownership stakes in like 8 different companies, and those 8 companies aren't worth anything except for Redox, which I own far less in because of the money we've raised in it. So I don't know, we really thought of it as binary. Like we want to make sure that our employees are incentivized to do well for the company, that our investors are, and that we have enough capital to continue to grow it. And so we've been growing with that sort of mentality in mind.
So, talk about employee equity. A lot of times founders, they don't mention it, but like, how are you incentivizing those new hires?
So when we there's kind of two periods, or maybe 3. So there was the time before we raised our seed round, the time between the seed round and the A round, and then the time after the A round. And for those, it's kind of different milestones of how risky the company was, as well as different milestones of how much we could actually pay people. So before the seed round, we couldn't pay people anything, right? Because we literally put in a couple $100 each to like start the LLC, and we didn't make any money for like 6 months. And that was our like pre-seed, and we actually brought on our first developer just as we were closing our seed round, and we had nothing to pay him with. We were just we were lucky that James was great friends with him, and he trusted what we were doing, and he was passionate about it. And we said, we promise you we'll make this up to you. And we gave him equity. We gave him stock options. And subsequently, there's a scale between cash. Well, there's a scale between making nothing and making a market salary, right? And if you're making nothing, you have to be making at least your market salary in stock options. And because the company is really risky, you should probably be making double that in stock options, because the company is so risky that it's probably going to fail. So you should be able to make up for that because you're taking that risk without taking in cash. As we were able to start paying people more along the spectrum, and as they were coming in, if we're paying you half of your wage in cash, the other half of your wage should be represented in stock options, plus a little bit because the company's still risky. So we're to a point now where we're getting a lot closer to market, but still every single person who joins the team, we're at 11 people now, and we have job offers out to another 2 people. Both of those still come with stock options that are not insignificant. They get carved out of a stock option pool that we set aside every time we raise a round, and that pool is meant to be allocated to all of the people we hired during that phase.
Awesome. I'm going to talk a bit about you now. So, where are you from?
I was born in Hawaii. That's where I get my racial ambiguity. And then I grew up in Phoenix, though. Went to Arizona State for undergrad, studied economics. Then went to Boston University to study more economics. And then moved to Madison to work at Epic. So that's kind of my ride around the country.
Awesome. And kind of like, where did you pick up all your knowledge if you just studied economics? Like, where did you get the
You just studied economics?
Yeah, you just studied economics. Like, where did you get the term sheet deals and, preferred stock, common stock? Where'd you pick up all this knowledge?
I still feel like I don't know what the heck it was we signed. So you learn as you go, right? And when we were raising money, it was really important to understand first it's understand how to pitch your product, right? When we raised our seed round, we didn't even know how to pitch the company. So the first times we met with investors, it wasn't to pitch and try to raise money. It was to say, like, hey, I'm thinking about raising money. Can you look at my pitch deck and tell me if it's crazy? And the people who gave us advice on that ended up actually investing in us. So we reached out to all the angels in the community and we're like, hey, we have a company. We think it might be investable. Can you look at our pitch deck and tell us if you think we're crazy? So that was like the first thing, was like, let's learn how to pitch. And then after they say, okay, we're ready to invest, then it's like, well, let's figure out what this term sheet means, and figure out what the terms of this are and what our valuation should be. And there's just endless amounts of resources out there, right? Recently, the things I'm learning are on sales. Like, I don't know how to grow a sales organization. I don't know how to process leads, how to create a sales funnel, what to measure during that. All of that stuff, like, no idea. So I've just been buying books, listening to podcasts, trying stuff out, working with people on my team to teach each other and help each other. So there's this, I think one of the most important parts of being an entrepreneur is having that continuous learning, because you always have to learn something new. I said earlier that your job is always going to change. It's always going to be something else, and so you have to be ready to do that, to learn with it as the skill set needs to change. Awesome.
What are some of your favorite apps or tools for constantly learning on the go?
Constantly learning. Okay. I have a reputation on our team for having all these different apps for different like productivity things and business tools. For learning on the go, though, I like podcasts a lot. So I listen to a lot of different podcasts. I listened to the startup podcast, which I thought was really kind of more entertaining than. There's a lot of things you can relate to as a startup, but I think the most educational podcast that I've been listening to recently is the Bowery Sales Startup Sales podcast, and it's a really low production value but really high content-wise. They just interview salespeople at startups and tell you how the heck they do what they do, and the different tools that they use. And then I like my Kindle app a lot. I download books on it, and every night, like to fall asleep, I just whip out the book and start reading it. And I switch off every other night between nonfiction and fiction, because if you read nonfiction all the time, you just start hating reading. So.
What are your current reads?
So I'm reading a book called Predictable Revenue, which is a book written by like an early Salesforce employee, and it's really dry, but it talks about what to measure when you're growing a sales organization. So that's the nonfiction, and my fiction is a kind of like a quasi sci-fi book called Wool. I don't know if anyone's heard of this book. It's like about a post-apocalyptic world. It's really like, I don't know.
So you have to be a pretty creative individual to make 8 companies and just kind of keep going and never have like this never-ending energy. Where do you get your creativity from?
I don't know.
I mean, you have to get inspired. Where do you find inspiration?
I don't know. So I think if I wasn't going to be an entrepreneur, I would want to be a graphic designer. Like in high school, I took a graphic design class, and I like really loved like looking at the way that, like spatially, the way that things work together. And then when I studied economics, because I thought that being an economist would make me more money, turns out I could probably. Yeah. Well, anyways. What I loved about economics was the whole point of economics is to kind of take a step back and look at a system, right? And analyze how that system works. And then we even like graph that on crazy axes. And I think that skill set in particular, I think every subject, whatever you study, most subjects teach you how to take a step back and analyze, right? So when people argue about, oh, this is why physics is the best, or this is why economics is the best, it's typically like because of the skills you took from that to apply to other things. And I think that one of those skills is taking a step back and analyzing, like, who's involved in a situation and why it works that way. And I think that's the number one skill that I use when brainstorming or trying to be creative about a situation, is that, this person brings, these incentives to the table. This is what they want to get out of a situation, and this is what we want to get out of a situation, and this is what you want to get out of the situation. And then trying to take myself out of my sort of personal desire in it to think about what is an ideal relationship at the table. And I think that's, whenever you're brainstorming, that's like an easy thing to try to do, is remove yourself from it and analyze it as if you were doing a case study in a textbook.
What's the one thing you're excited for in 2020?
2020?
Yeah.
I'm not a planner. When is 2020? That's like
5 years.
5 years?
5 years.
Oh, man. So I literally have not thought that far ahead. So I don't know. Like I can tell you this next year, I'm excited to like get our product out there and see if we can get people using it, seeing if we can turn it into a machine, into a business. Beyond that, like beyond 2017, I don't know if we'll still be a business then. Like hopefully we've gotten to a point where it's still going. Personally, like as a human, I want to be healthier. I think in the last 3 years, that's one of the things that I've lost at becoming an entrepreneur. When I worked at Epic, I rode my bike out to Epic every single day. It's like 13, 14 miles each way. Before that, when I was in grad school, I was on the cycling team, and like I was always, like at that semi-pro level of cycling. And then the past 3 years, I've just been sitting around getting fat, and like that kind of sucks. So I hope in 2020 that I'll be like an athlete again. And I don't know if it'll have to take like not being an entrepreneur anymore, but maybe I could figure out a way to do both.
Awesome. So in closing, I know this question gets asked a lot, but let's say you could go back 5-10 years and you could do it all over again. What would you do differently? And let's place yourself in 2015. So now knowing everything you know today, like starting all over today.
So wait, what?
So if you could redo,
if I went back to 2010,
so take a young Niko, like the future you, and put him in the future like today, and say, hey, this is what I would do differently, and this is what I would do.
Like if I retained my knowledge over the past 5 years.
Exactly.
And it's just like 5 year younger me sitting here.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I think I would have gotten into startups sooner. I was So I worked at Wells Fargo for 4 years as an analyst. Like I was 18 and I was making like $50K like in college, which was pretty cool. And then like that grew over the 4 years I worked there. And so I thought like the big company life was right for me. And then went to Epic and kind of had a similar path of like, it's nice making money. But it's soul crushing. Like you can do, like, I think the cool thing about startups is that you can actually figure out how to add the most value in the world as a human being, because your startup is going to be, the only reason why a startup will succeed is because it adds value to someone or something, right? Like it creates something worth buying. And if you're a big piece of that, if you're a founder in that, like you're a core piece to why that thing was possible, and therefore like as a human contributing something on this earth, you've done more than being, you know, a cog at a 10,000 person company that can quickly be replaced. So I think that yeah, if I was to go back 5 years, I would try to get into this sooner. But that being said, like the journey that we take like gets you here, and I don't think I would trade anything to be in a different place than I am right now. I wake up excited every morning. Like I can't, it's funny, I can't do anything else in the morning but like get on my laptop. Like I'll try to go to the gym or something like that, and the only thing I can think about is like what's in my email box and how do I get to it faster. And to be that passionate about what you're working on is something that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Awesome. My last question for the day is, what is your biggest fear?
I guess so. There's a lot of, like I mentioned, that I haven't been as active or healthy, and I have a fear that because I'm so like focused on the business, that I'll give up personal things in my life, like you know, having a family or like having that sort of like wash away. And as millennials, right, that's the thing that we get pinned on a lot is, you know, no one's having kids, no one's getting married these days. I just got married, so yeah, thank you. So like I'm afraid that I've always said that like our parents always talked about having a work-life balance, right? They're like, I want to work during the day, and then I'm going to go home and hang out. I'm going to get a boat and drive out on the weekends, and that'll be my life. And then my work is my work. And I feel like our generation is all about, like, hopefully our work is valuable enough that we can consider that our life, and that we can be passionate about it and love that. And I just worry that maybe I've gone too far in that extreme. Like, what if my life is just like solving electronic medical record interoperability? Like, what if that turns out to be our life, and I don't, like, I stop riding my bike, which is something I love doing. I stop, you know, hanging out with people. I stop coming to 100 State. Like that would be a huge bummer. So, you know, I think it's important to make sure that there's a balance there. Yeah, and I'd be disappointed if there wasn't.
Well, thank you for your time, Niko. Truly, it was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Oh, I guess Q&A from the audience. So, any questions for Niko?
Very good question. How does the Affordable Care Act affect like what you guys are doing, and like, more generally, like how does it affect like innovation in healthcare in general?
Yeah, Affordable Care Act is a great. That's a great question. So we hear about healthcare reform all the time, right? During the debates on healthcare reform, people were trying to basically, they were debating, should we rip out the system entirely and go to a one-payer model and have the government kind of do everything, kind of like what's done in NHS in the UK, or do we go to a fully privatized system, or do we kind of fix things and tweak them? And what ended up happening was, we have this, I kind of think of it as we have this old broken down car that is healthcare. It's like a 1982 Nissan Sentra. That was the first car I drove, and it was an old broken down junker. That's what healthcare is. It's like a shitty thing moving along. 1/3 of its input is waste. And what some people were proposing is, let's rip this thing out and bring a new car in. Other people were saying, well, maybe we can just put new tires on it, maybe we can put new doors on it. What the Affordable Care Act did was it just floored it. It's just like boom, and so pieces are flying off right now, like just pieces of the car are breaking. and it's just like headed down a road, and we don't know where that's going. And that's what's exciting about it. So what's happening is the way that payments happen in healthcare are changing all over the place. What that's doing is it's crushing margins that were already really small in the healthcare space and saying we're going to slim those margins even more and more and more. So health systems have to figure out a way to reduce costs. And so it's applying pressure on the cost side of healthcare, because costs are where the hypothesis was, where it was being bloated. And what that's doing for innovation is health systems are all looking at how do we reduce costs right now. And so they're saying technology is often a great way to reduce costs, so they're looking for new technology to help them reduce costs. So there's a lot of opportunity for people in healthcare to help do that. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. One of the big challenges with that is health systems aren't good at working with startups because they're risk averse. And we want them to be, right? They care for people's lives. They have your data in there. They cut into your skin when you show up. Like, that's scary. I don't want them using a podunk piece of software that's going to break down. So there's this challenge between, like, yeah, the door just flew off of our car, and we don't want to replace it with like another crappy door. Let's put a sweet startup like thing on there. But we want to make sure that company is going to be around next year. So that's the sort of challenge that we see the industry being in right now. Large part driven off of ACA. I don't think anyone's ever explained ACA that way, though. Like, I didn't explain anything about how it actually works, but that would take far too long. Yeah.
My question actually builds off that. So, Meaningful Use 3, there's a requirement that...
API requirement.
API requirement.
Yeah.
Vendors and organizations provide APIs ostensibly for free to anybody that wants to use them. How does Redox survive in that market?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So to give some background and color on that, right now so if you want to, so if a health system is going to use a software application to help with your care in the hospital. Let's say it's an application that they want you to bring home with you, and it'll send you a reminder every time you're supposed to take a medication, right? Maybe you have a weird medication that you have to take at certain times. So right now, if a health system wants to share your medication list with that software, it's done through a legal agreement between that health system and the software vendor. So they have an agreement in place so that way they can exchange that data. You as a patient had no say in that transaction. So you didn't say to the health system, I want my data to go to this application. That's not the way that the rest of the world works as far as sharing data. The rest of the world would work through you as a patient or as a user authorizing another application to share data. So new regulations coming out that says that healthcare needs to provide APIs such that a patient can authorize another application to use their data from a health system. So if you have data at UW Health, you go and get treatment there. That means that UW Health has a bunch of information about you, all your allergies, all your medications, diagnoses, history, your providers, all of that. Maybe you want an application like HealthKit on your phone, or another app that you might want to use to share that data with a different provider, or analyze the data or benchmark it against anyone. Right now, you have no ability to take that data and put it into the application on your phone that you want to have. And because of that, it's been a real roadblock in people developing apps. Because if you would imagine, there's endless ways to use that data that consumers might want to use to analyze it, to share it with whoever they want, to send grandma's data to the son or daughter, right? So apps haven't been developed to do that because they don't have access to it. So the government's saying, we are mandating that health systems need to provide access to that data such that a patient has the right to authorize their data to be used in that fashion. Redox plans to actually be the one who facilitates that. So our API structure already does that. We just do that through the agreement with the health system. We can simply change the agreement to a patient authorizes the use of their data to any application that's on our network. We have 200 applications that are already being built on our network to our specifications. So if any of these applications want to be used by a patient and we're hooked up at the health system, then the data can flow through to that application. The reason why, and it's done through a standard. So these applications need to, to specifically answer your question, the legislation doesn't say that health systems have to agree to a standard. They just have to provide one, which means that UW Health System might have one standard API, and Meritor might have another, and GHT might have a different one. Which means that as an application developer, you'll have to develop to specifications of 3 different application programming interfaces within a given region, which is basically a non-starter for developers. So for what Redox does is we work with developers, we give them a standard, and then with whatever standards that the health system chooses to use, we will do the hard work of mapping our standard to theirs. And therefore developers just need to map to ours, and then we'll connect up to all of the other ones. And it's hard work and it costs a lot of money, but the thing is that once we're connected once, we can amortize those costs over a number of different software vendors that are using that same channel. Yeah.
Why can't Epic just do that?
So Epic is the one providing those standard, well, those customizable APIs for the health systems. So it's the health system has the ability to customize what Epic gives them, and that's what breaks down the standard. Because when you customize a standard, it's no longer standard. Epic probably could, but it goes into a lot of incentives on what their customers want and what they want as a business. And I'd be happy to talk to you about some of those offline. We can whiteboard it.
Any more questions?
Doing the same thing that you guys are doing, or are you guys the only one that's kind of building your own API about integrating?
If nobody was doing what your startup is doing, you're probably not doing something very valuable. So we definitely have competitors in the space, and we have people trying to do this in various fashions. The primary competitor are people who are building point-to-point connections between a software vendor and a health system, and that's something that will only be used by that software vendor and that health system. One of our big differentiators is that we're doing it in a centralized fashion. So all of the data that flows through our system goes through our cloud and hits the same standard, which means that any additional application or health system that's connected to our network grows the network, because any one of them can talk to each other through that hub in the middle, through that standard that they're mapping through. So I think we're one of the only people doing that model. That model has pros and cons, right? So the good thing about what's happening is that there are a lot of really smart people trying to tackle this from different angles at different price points for different groups. And what we'll see over the next 5 years, 2020, what I'm most excited about in 2020 is that this problem is going to be solved likely by the efforts of a lot of different companies. Many of them will be startups, and hopefully Redox will still be at the table.
Researchers or people at the university that are doing work in this area. It seems to me I heard someone do a proposal a few years ago where they were going to have a central repository and give people keys to get into this and distribute this information without knowing the other guy's key. People from the university working on it.
Yeah, so we have not worked with anyone from a research capacity on this stuff. There have been different business models. James has an idea.
Yeah. So so the possible group you're talking about is the Phoenix project, and they do aggregate a lot of data across different, their applicants need along with a lot of other research data. It is primarily research driven. So I think for a third-party application or anything that's in the hands of a general practice physician that would not be able to use that, I think it's primarily for doing super 300 variable type research studies that run over months or something like that. Yeah. So it would primarily be identifying data. Yeah.
Various business models try to tackle this problem before, and I think the trick here, beyond just the technology, is figuring out a sustainable business model to help these disparate systems exchange data in a way that you can sustain a business doing. So we think we found it, although we're far from cash flow break even. So we have 22 months to figure out if we can make that cash flow break even, or convince more investors to put more money into us to keep living the dream. Yeah.
Do you store any data in your network, or you just transfer?
So we're simply a conduit. We don't store it. You're not meant to build an application off of our database. We store it simply for troubleshooting purposes. So if a transmission fails, then we'll retrigger the message. But yeah, we don't keep it at rest for anybody. It's cool. It was a nice mix of like entrepreneurial questions and technology questions. And it's funny, half the group would nod their head when I'm talking about one, and then the other group would not, like. Yeah.
Definitely. So, I guess that's a wrap.
Yeah. I'll be finishing off this case of beer, so we'll be hanging out. Cool.